All right, everybody, welcome and hello. We are starting a new unit today about adaptation. So this unit will take us from now until the end of the school year. And for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about different types of animal adaptations. So first question is, what is an adaptation? An adaptation is basically a way that an animal has changed itself or grown and evolved to survive in its environment. So when you can adapt to something, you can adjust or change in order to survive or in order to increase your chances of survival. So adaptation is a technique for survival, or it's a way to survive. And in nature, when we look at animals in the wild, we normally see two different types of adaptation. Animals have either adapted their body or their behavior. So we call this either a structural or a behavioral adaptation. Another way to say structural is also physical. So you'll hear me refer to both structural and physical adaptations. So let's start with structural adaptations. Structural or physical adaptations are basically body adaptations. So that means that different parts of animal bodies or ways that animals have grown and developed body parts in order to help them survive in their own environment. So you already know that out of the millions of different species of animals that we have on Earth, there are so many different animal bodies. Right? Different types of fur, different eyes, different ears, different types of hands and feet, different shapes, right? Some animals have 2 legs or 4 legs or no legs at all. So there's a huge variety of different animal bodies. But the important thing to remember is that each animal body is specifically adapted or has specifically evolved to suit the habitat or the environment of that animal. So every animal body part is on purpose. It's serving a purpose. So here are some different ways that you might see structural adaptations or different body parts that are adapted to help animals survive. You'll see adaptations in animals' eyes, ears, noses, their teeth, as well as their limbs, which is arms and legs, as well as wings and tails, their fur, their skin, and all other body parts, right? So these are just some of the most obvious body parts that are different for every creature and help them to survive. But every part of an animal's body is helping it in some way to survive in its environment. So over the coming weeks, we're going to break down each one of these categories, and we'll spend a day talking about different types of animal eyes and the ways that they're adapted, different types of animal ears and the ways that those help them to survive. So today, I just want us to have a good understanding of what an adaptation is and the 2 different categories of adaptations. Okay, but don't worry, we'll get into much further detail over the next few weeks. So here are just some images to help you get an idea of what a structural adaptation might look like. Right? Different types of eyes, different types of ears. So for example, the gigantic ears of this deer are shaped that way on purpose. The deer evolved this style of ear to be able to hear predators from far away and to keep it safe. Same with this little mouse's ears. They're shaped that way for a reason. Same with noses. You'll see the horse's nose is much different than the fox's nose, and that's because each nose is adapted for a specific purpose. Right? The fox, being a predator, has a much more pointed nose so that it can find the direction of its prey. And then, of course, different animals have different teeth, depending on the type of food they eat or the type of environment they live in. So this lion, being a carnivore and a hunter or a predator, has really sharp, long teeth. And same with this shark. Whereas obviously a cow or a horse or a human might have different teeth for eating different things. And then we have different limbs. So this gecko's limbs are well adapted to be able to stick to different surfaces. And you'll see that they have all these little ridges in there. And limbs also include things like wings and fins and tails. So all these different creatures have different body parts depending on their environment. This ring-tailed lemur needs a long and flexible and strong tail to help it navigate the trees that it lives in, right? And obviously this fish is not going to need the same thing. It needs fins to be able to navigate underwater. So depending on the habitat or environment or the biome that the animal lives in, it's going to determine what type of body or structural adaptations that animal has developed over time. And it is worth mentioning that adaptations don't just happen overnight. So even though environments can change very rapidly, an adaptation is something that an animal has developed over a long period of time. So it's usually something that has evolved over thousands and thousands of years. And hair or fur or your skin or body covering is another great adaptation for different types of animals, whether it is to protect them or sometimes the hair or fur is made for camouflage, or you see that this snake has great camouflaged scales to blend in with its environment. And sometimes hair or fur is really thick to protect against the cold. Just depends on what kind of habitat the animal's living in. Okay, awesome. So structural adaptations can be anything that's a part of the animal's body that helps it to survive in its environment. So eyes, ears, noses, teeth, as well as limbs, fur, skin, hair, etc. All these different body parts are structural adaptations to help an animal survive. Okay, so pause your video. Let's answer question number 1. Name 3 different types of structural or physical adaptations. Awesome. And we haven't really dived into each particular adaptation, but you could have just told me a few different body parts that are adapted to help animals survive. So structural physical adaptations could appear in the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, the teeth, the limbs, or the body covering, the fur, the skin, the hair. Any of those are good answers. Okay, fantastic. So we know that adaptations come in 2 forms, either body changes or behavior changes. And either way, it's to help the animal survive, right? So either a structural adaptation, a way that the animal's body is suited to help it survive, or a behavioral adaptation is something that the animal does. So it's an action or a behavior that the animal does to help it survive. Okay, so a structural adaptation, part of the body that helps the animal survive. Behavioral adaptation is an action or behavior that helps the animal survive. So let's talk about the second type of adaptation, behavioral adaptations. Or in other words, survival behavior. So this is not a part of an animal's body, but an example of how they act or how they behave. Okay, so there's different types of behavioral adaptations. One of the main ones, the most obvious ones, is grouping. So animals come together in herds or in packs or in flocks, or different groups of animals have different names. In fact, it's actually pretty interesting to see all the different names of animal groups. But this is a behavioral adaptation. It's a way that animals behave in order to survive. So not every animal lives in a group or a pack, but a lot of animals do. They work together to hunt, or they live together to help each other survive. So grouping is one way that animals behave in order to survive. That makes it a behavioral adaptation. Another behavioral adaptation is migration. Do you know what migration is? Have you heard of migration before? Migration is simply moving from place to place. So if you have ever moved house or moved from one city to another, you also have migrated. But usually when we're talking about migration as a behavioral adaptation, we're talking about seasonal migration. So animals who move from place to place regularly every year. So first thing that might come to your mind is geese who fly south during the winter. Or other types of animals like oxen and elephants, even caribou, migrate in herds. And usually the purpose of migration is to get to an area that is either warmer or has more food and water. So when animals are migrating, just like monarchs are right now, did you guys know it's monarch migration season? So if you look out your window, you might see monarch butterflies flying past. They're all moving in gigantic swarms right now so that they can get to warmer areas with more food and more resources. Okay, so let's pause our video and tell me, what is migration? Define migration. Alrighty, and you could have told me a few answers. Maybe you said migration is moving from place to place, or you could say migration is moving towards warmer weather or more food, or you could simply say migration is a behavioral adaptation to help animals survive. Awesome. Okay, so behavioral adaptations include grouping, migration, and then another TION word, hibernation. TION says shun, migration, hibernation. So you probably have heard of hibernation before. Hibernation is when animals sleep through the winter. So they go dormant or they rest throughout the winter. That doesn't mean that they never wake up and never leave their den during the winter, but it means that for most of the winter, they're sleeping or resting so that they can conserve their energy when it's cold and there's not much food out. So different animals who hibernate are bears, obviously. Bears are probably the most famous hibernators, as well as creatures like groundhogs. Bees. Did you know that bees hibernate? This is an important behavioral adaptation for bees because when it's too cold, they'll die. So in order to survive the winter in a lot of places, bees have to go dormant or basically hide away and sleep for most of the winter time. That way they can just come out once it's warmer and they have an easier time surviving. Different kinds of tortoises and turtles also hibernate, as well as skunks, bats, and lots of other animals that we'll go into further detail on our actual hibernation lesson. So just a small sampling of different types of creatures, but you can see that there are lots of different animals from lots of different biomes who use this behavioral adaptation to survive the harsh winters. Okay, so go ahead and pause your video. Let's answer question number 3. Name 3 types of animals who hibernate to survive the winter. Tell me 3 types. Alrighty, so you probably said bears, the most obvious one. You could have also said skunks, groundhogs, bees, bats, or there's lots of other animals who also hibernate. Okay, so behavioral adaptations include grouping, migration, hibernation, and the last one that we'll talk about today is nocturnal animals. So one behavior that animals sometimes do to help them survive is that they only come out during the nighttime. That's what nocturnal means, is that a nocturnal animal is active at night, mostly. Again, that doesn't mean they don't come out during the day, but it means most of their activity happens after the sun goes down. So animals who are famous for being nocturnal are owls, hunters like jaguars and panthers, raccoons, coyotes, foxes, and many, many, many other creatures. So usually when a creature is nocturnal, it's for one of two reasons, either to help them escape the heat of the day or to help them hunt for their food better, or so they have an easier time hunting. So lots of animals use this behavior adaptation, especially in the desert where it's really hot during the day, but it gets colder at night, and in other biomes too, where there's just lots of activity. So some of the bigger hunters need the cover of darkness to be able to sneak up on their prey. Okay, so pause your video. We're on question number 4. How does being nocturnal help animals to survive? What are 2 reasons why an animal would want to be nocturnal? So you could have said either to escape the heat or to help with hunting. All right, let's recap what we learned today. Adaptations are ways that animals change. Ways that animals change, either their body or their behavior, to help them to survive. Okay, so there's 2 types of adaptations that we learned about today: structural, also known as physical, and behavioral adaptations. So the structural adaptations are the parts of your body or the parts of animal bodies that have changed or grown and developed in ways that help the animal survive. So we might see structural adaptations in an animal's eyes or ears, in their nose, their teeth, their limbs, their wings or their tail, their fur, their hair, their skin, all these different body parts that can be changed or adapted in different ways. And then on the behavioral side, we're not looking at parts of the body as much as we're looking at different actions or ways of behaving. So behavioral adaptations include grouping or living together in herds or packs, migration, so moving to warmer places or places where there's more food throughout the year, hibernation, just sleeping through the hardest part of the year, or being nocturnal, so coming out mostly at nighttime. So these are all behaviors that animals do. These are all body parts that animals have, but both of these different adaptations are ways that animals have changed or developed in order to survive. So they're survival tools. Because y'all know nature is gnarly. It is a rough world out there. So every animal has their own tools, their own body parts, their own behaviors that they use to help them navigate this difficult world. Okay, we're on our last question of the day. Go ahead and answer question number 5 for me, please. Pause your video and tell me, what is the difference between structural and behavioral adaptations? That is our main idea of the day. And hopefully you told me that structural adaptations are body parts, and behavioral adaptations are ways that the animal behaves or actions. Awesome. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, students. And that is the end of our lesson today. You are ready to take your DOL. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you later. Bye.